Right. So today we are looking at macro one. Okay. So let's look at what we'll be doing today. We'll just be looking at how to determine equilibrium output and then equilibrium in the labor market. Okay. But these people, I call them the old people. I mean, all those economists that existed before the Keynesian revolution. Okay, so those ancient time economists, that's what we'll be looking at, how they view the labor market and then the how equilibrium was uh, attained in both the product and then the labor market. So by the end of the session, we should be able to derive and graph the marginal product curve from a production function. Okay, so we see a typical production function, and then through calculus, we should be able to um, derive the marginal product curve. Okay, and then we are also supposed to be able to explain the two versions of firms' profit maximizing condition whenever they are hiring labor. Okay, we'll look at that, and also we should be able to graphically and algebraically derive the demand for labor curve or function from the firm's maximization. Can you mute yourself if you think there's noise? Thank you. Right, so those are the things that basically we'll be looking at. Okay, so we'll look at the assumptions under the theory that we'll be looking at today. I'm sure you know that in econs, whatever theory or theorem that they talk about, they need to talk about assumptions. So we'll look at the assumptions governing those old thoughts. And then we'll also look at the production function and then the marginal product curve for labor, as we stated earlier. I think these are all the things that we spoke about earlier. Right, so first we'll look at the history and then the working assumptions. So as I was saying, when we talk about this form of economics, we are talking about all those people who practice the study of econs before the coming of John Maynard Keynes. He came around 1930. Okay, so whatever economic thought that existed before this, those are the people that we term this. Okay, so we can talk about people like the father of econs, Adam Smith, Cecil Pigou, Sam Watson, Davenport, all those people. Okay, all those people came before John Maynard Keynes wrote his general theory of econs. So he termed these old thoughts as this. Okay, so any economic thought that came before 1930, those are the people that we'll be looking at. Okay, so this is it. John Maynard Keynes wrote the general theory of econs in, I think, 1936. So whatever macroeconomic theory that came before that year, those are the people that we'll be talking about. So Adam Smith was the father of modern econs. Then all these people too, they all came before Alfred Maynard Keynes, David Ricardo. I'm sure you've heard their names before. This is Robert Malthus, John Mill, John Stuart Mill, Alfred Marshall. If you hear the Marshallian demand curve, this is the guy who brought the Marshallian demand curve. And then Jean Baptiste Say, he brought the Say's law. Okay, and then Cecil Pigou. I mean, all these people were those economists that existed before the Keynesian revolution. Okay, so this is just some history. It will never come anywhere. Don't bother. Right. And then even before these people existed, there was a system called mercantilism. Okay, for these people, they believed that a country's wealth, or a country can only accumulate wealth whenever he trades with the outside world. Okay, so they believed in billionism, where your wealth, the country's wealth, was just measured by the quantum of precious metals, bullions, like gold, silver, that the country had. So if you had more silver or more gold, then it means that your country was considered wealthy or rich. Okay, so for them, what they were trying to do was they believe in protectionism, where the country is supposed to protect the infant or the local industries. Whatever policy that you adopt to make sure that you have a positive balance of trade, encourage more exports, discourage imports, and protect the locally manufactured goods. Okay, by so doing, you realize that you are getting uh, a positive balance of trade. So that was what mercantilism was all about. So they were adopting policies like export subsidies. Okay, so when they give subsidies on exports, then the locally made goods can travel to the outside world. So these subsidies tend to encourage exports. Then they impose import duties, high import duties, just to discourage importation. Okay, and I'm sure by now you know when you combine these two, you are bound to have a positive terms of trade, a favorable terms of trade. When you subsidize your exports, then you have a higher value for exports. When you put import duties on imported goods too, then you tend to have a lower value of what import. So finding the difference, then you are bound to have a positive or a favorable terms of trade. And also, they started the state colonies. So you see that a country like France, they colonize Togo. Okay, so whatever goods that they produce in France, they will just come and pour everything in Togo just to increase their export market. And I think that thing is still working. Togo has some relations with France. I think they call it the free trade or something. That's why people move from Ghana to go and buy stuff from Togo. Togo is no better than Ghana, but it's because of that trade relation. Okay. So if you are able to, I mean, during those times, if the country was able to adopt these policies, then the country was deemed to be successful or rich or wealthy. Okay, right. And then they also believe that the state was supposed to control any major economic activity. So the state was regulating international trade. Okay, and the protectionism that I was talking about, make sure that you are protecting the local firms, the local industries. And when if you can do this, what you can do is you can put a high tariff on imports. So though people can import, the imported goods will carry a very high cost. So it will be better to just buy a locally made good than buying those high cost imported goods. Okay, so by doing this, their main aim was to have a favorable balance of trade. That was what mercantilism was about. Okay, right. So this was their belief that the state was supposed to regulate almost everything. Okay, even the private sector too, the state was supposed to control it. And also billionism, what I was talking about, that the nation's stock of precious metals determine whether the country was wealthy or poor. So if you have more gold or silver, then your country was deemed rich. That is why the pound, the UK pound is still strong, because those times those times UK had a lot of gold. Even now they have, I think they have the highest gold reserves in the world. Okay, they have a lot of gold, and that's what is backing their currency. Okay, and it stems from all those mercantilist ideas. Okay. Right, so this is about mercantilism. And then those people came, the Ricardos and the Davenports came, and then they brought a new thought about macroeconomics. Okay, so we are moving to this. And then for them to, what they believed is, whenever there's a change in aggregate demand, it can only affect price. It has no lasting impact on output. Okay, so for them, they believe in the supply side, but anything that will cause a change in demand was just strong enough to cause a change in price, but real output could never change. Even if there was a change, they just saw that change as temporal. Okay, it was just a short-term disequilibrium. Okay, so for them, the basic thing you need to know is they believed in supply side factors affecting real variables like output. Okay, any factor that was from the demand side could only cause changes in price. So I think when you were doing your introduction to what did you do last semester? Elements of accounts, the macro. There's a statement that monetary policy is always and anywhere an inflationary policy. Whenever you change money supply, you are just causing a change in price. You can't cause a real change. When we talk about real change, we are talking about changes in the real factors like output. Okay, so before we go on, this is what you need to bear in mind. Whatever we'll be talking about, just know that any factor that will cause a change in demand cannot, even if it affects it, it is seen as a temporal change, which means that output will always go back to equilibrium. Okay, right. And they also believed that prices and wage move freely. They move freely. They can always change. But just know that even if they move, even if they change, they don't have a lasting effect on output or the level of labor hired. They are just there to cause short-term or temporary disequilibrium. Okay, but just know that prices can change. It can go up at any time. It can come down at any time, just like wage. Okay, but later on, you see that it's not always like that. When kings came in, okay, so for these people, that was what they believed in. That price and wage can really move freely at any point in time. Okay, but one thing they believed is that equilibrium will always be restored. Okay, there will always be equilibrium in the economy. This means that your potential output is always bound to be the same as your current what output. Whenever there's a deviation, if there's a deviation, it was just seen as temporal, and that in no time they will always what come back here. If you produce more than what you are supposed to produce, something will happen and then you come back here. If you produce less than what you are supposed to, I mean, something is going to happen for you to come back there. We'll look at what will cause all those restoration in equilibrium. Okay, so just know that for them, they believed that always equilibrium in the economy. That why is always right. So we move on. Okay, so let's look at the assumptions. The main assumption is that it's only real factors that can cause a change in real variables. If you take something like output, It's only real factors that can cause a change in output. So if you take a nominal factor like money, money can never cause a change in output, which means that during those times they didn't believe in a central bank at all. I'm not even sure there was a central bank, since they just believed in the government making sure that things are back to equilibrium. Okay, whenever you increase money supply or you decrease it, they don't really see any lasting changes in the economy. Just allow the system to bring whatever disequilibrium back to the stable state. Okay, so the main assumption is that it's only real factors as opposed to nominal factors that can cause a change in the real output. Money, as a perfect example of a nominal factor, cause uh, can never affect real output. Okay, and then they also believed in the invincible hand. I'm sure you've read something on that. There's a book written by Adam Smith. Okay, it talks about the invincible hand, the self-adjusting nature of the economy. Okay, whenever there's a disequilibrium, the thing will always come back again. So for them, the role of the government wasn't really necessary. Just allow the system to work. But when we're talking about mercantilism, they believe that the government was supposed to regulate every important aspect of the economy. But for these people, they believed in the self-adjusting nature of the economy. So they didn't really need the government policies to make sure that there's a stable economy. So this one too is another important assumption that you need to take note. The first one is that they believed in real factors causing changes in the real output. And then secondly, they believed that the government wasn't really needed. Your policies, keep your policies to yourself. Just allow your the invincible hand to work. Okay, just allow the system to work on its own. Okay, so these are just the assumptions under this one. The reason why the government policies are not needed, and that there's a self adjusting nature of the economy, is that the wages and the prices can freely move, and as a result, if today they are too high, then it's expected that in the next period they are supposed to reduce just to restore equilibrium. Okay, and there's perfect information. If both consumers and the producers have perfect information, then there's always equilibrium. Even when we are talking about the demand and supply analysis, because there's perfect information, we are all able to settle on a stable price and then a stable output. Okay, so because of perfect information and a free movement of wages and then prices, okay, there's a self-adjusting nature of the economy. Okay, any question? We've not really started what we want to do. These are just history, and this is just a history lesson, and assumptions lesson. Any question on the assumptions? But I hope you cannot hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So we move on. So these are the things. I think this lecture notes was prepared by Dr. Barima. I'm sure. Again, yeah, what that or the above you. Okay, these are just what we spoke about. That it's only real factors, as, as opposed to the nominal factors that can determine output. Okay, and then they also believe that the government is not supposed to enact any policies. They should just allow the private sector to go unregulated because of the self-adjusting nature of the economy and the various markets. And they also believed in the sales law. Okay, the sales law states that whenever you produce something, the production will create its own demand. Okay, so supply will always create its own demand. So if the economy is producing good A, then definitely that production of good A is going to create a demand for that good A that has been produced. Okay, so they also believed in that. You just produce, just produce. When you produce, there will be demand for whatever good that you have produced. Okay, so this means that they were more supply side oriented. They believed in factors that uh, affected supply as factors that had lasting effect on the real variables like output. If you really want to cause a change in our output, then you should be targeting the factors that affects supply, not demand, because any factor that affected demand was only seen as having a temporal effect on output. Okay, so this is what we've been talking about, that the demand side factors, they have no lasting effect on output. Okay, and they believed in what? The market system just allowed demand and supply to work. Just allow demand and supply to work. Prices will always adjust. They will always go back to the equilibrium or the stable state. Okay, so this one too, they did not believe in government regulations. Just keep your policies to yourself. The government shouldn't intervene. Okay, right. So now we move on to what we'll be looking at: the production and then the demand for labor. Uh, when you go into economics, we have a lot of markets. We have goods market, the money market, capital market. We also have the labor market. And whenever we talk about market, you know that we have two forces, two sides. We have buyers and sellers, right? So we are about to enter into the labor market. Just know that we'll have buyers there, we'll have sellers there too. Okay, but for now, we'll be looking at those who will be buying labor and those who will be hiring labor. And I'm sure we all know those who buy labor, right? Firms do buy labor. So we are entering into the market now. We're entering into the market now. Right. So whatever equilibrium determination that we want to look at, we will start from the production function. Okay, and basically when we talk about a production function, it's a function that connects with the relationship between output and input. Okay, what is the quantity of input that you use and what output did that input produce? We have like 10 minutes, and so when it ends, when the call ends, you just reconnect because of the type of Zoom that we are using. Right, so we are taking this as a production function. Y is equal to f of k and then n, where y is what? National output. F is just a functional notation. And then k is capital, and then n is what? Labor. Y is national output, k is capital, n is labor, and then f is just a functional notation connecting the inputs and then the output. Okay, so y is the Please take note. Oh, from today, labor will always be N. It will be N, not L. It's labor, but we'll be using N. Good. Ekuma's days are over. Right. So there's a production function that we'll be looking at. So Y will always depend on K and then N. But here we are assuming that K is constant in the short run. Of course, we are the a course that you've been doing. I think you are still in the short run for 2 years. You are still in the short run. I'm not even sure you get to the long run. you will be in the short run and maybe level 1, you get to the medium run, then you finish school. Okay, right. So because we are in the short run, we are just assuming K to be constant. So if K is constant, then it means that Y varies directly as what? As N? As N. Okay, so it means that now national output only depends on what? Labor. So this means that if you want to increase your national output, just increase what? The number of labor units that you've hired. Okay, and there's a positive relationship between the two. Whenever there's an increase in labor, then there's supposed to be an increase in national output, and vice versa. Okay, if there's a decrease, then so if you want to determine your Y, then you need to determine your N. If you want to know Y, then you need to know N, since Y depends on N. I hope you understand what I'm saying. If Y depends on N and you want to know the value of Y, then of course you need to know what? The value of N. When we know the value of N, then we can always get the value of what? Y. So now our job is to determine the equilibrium N. How do we get the maximizing unit of labor? Okay, what will maximize the level of national output. So what we'll be doing now is to get a N star. When you get your N, then you can always get your Y star. Okay, but we can only get N like when you are doing the micro demand and supply analysis. When demand and supply intersect, then we are able to get a equilibrium what? Quantity. It's just like this in the labor market. Before you can get your output maximizing level of labor, you need to what? Equate the demand for labor and then the supply of what? Labor. Okay, so first we'll begin with the demand for labor, then later on we'll add the supply of labor. We can get our N, then we can ultimately get our Y. Okay, we can ultimately get our Y. Right. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. In the labor market, we have both the demand and then the supply size. Okay, so some few properties of the production function that we'll be using. When K is given, then it means that Y varies directly as what? As N. Okay. There's a direct relationship between Y and then N. And also from the production function, we can compute our marginal product of labor. Okay, the marginal product of what? Labor. The production function is given as Y equals F, being a function of what? N. Now let's just eliminate the K. You even if K is there, if you want to find your marginal product of labor, you just differentiate your production function with respect to labor. Here N. Okay, so when you differentiate the Y with respect to N, then you get your marginal product of labor. And of course, it is positive because of what? The direct relationship between N and then Y. Okay, so when you find the Y, the N, your answer is supposed to be positive. I hope that's okay. It's supposed to be positive. So this is the necessary condition, you can be asked to prove there's sufficient condition that there's a positive relationship between n and then y. So that one you find the second order, and the second order is supposed to be less than 0. So you find d squared y, the n squared, and the answer is supposed to be less than 0. And it is because of what? The existence of the law of diminishing marginal returns. When you keep on adding more labor, output will be increasing, but it will get to a point where total output will fall. That's where the law of diminishing returns will set in. So the sufficient condition is that the second order derivative is supposed to be what? Negative. Okay. It's supposed to be negative.
Minimizing labor, they always want to maximize labor.
Okay, so Sami is asking if do they want to maximize or minimize the units of labor. What we are trying to find is the ideal units of labor that can produce ideal Y. Okay, but whenever you have a direct relationship between two uh, variables, if it takes something like labor and then uh, output, I'm sure even from SHS, you were told of the law of diminishing marginal returns. Okay, what this means is that if you keep on adding labor to a fixed input, then the marginal product of labor will initially what? Increase. It will get to a maximum and then diminish or fall. By that time, even if let's just assume we are talking about a company, okay? You've been hiring now, because your labor base is too large, you even tend to have issues with supervision, and as a result, some people will not be working, or they will be working under their capacity, and that is going to reduce your expected output. Okay, so if you keep on increasing labor in this model, initially there is always going to be an increase to total output, but after some time you will realize that the TP function will start to fall. The production function will start to fall, and that is where the law of diminishing marginal return sets in. Okay, and that's the reason why the second order is supposed to be less than 0 or negative. Okay, right. So let's look at this. Look at this function. Does this function exhibit these properties? Is the first order greater than 0? Is the second order less than 0? Assuming k is 1.
First order greater than 0. Given 0.5 n to the power minus 0.5.
I'm waiting for your answers.
And see, the second derivative, 4 and again negative. What do you multiply again negative? It's true.
Does it exhibit those two properties? Audrey.